Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I would like to welcome all of you to the second panel of the day second day of the 7th ADST. After the first panel touched upon the impact of Emirati-Israeli peace treaty on the Gulf region, we will try in this panel to cover the second part of the topic by dealing with the wider regional landscape and discussing the impact of the treaty on the rules of geopolitical game in the Middle East and its implication on the Iranian and Turkish ambitions. Two experts and specialists in the Turkish and Iranian affairs will participate in this panel, which include Dr. Omar Tashbinar, Senior Fellow, Brookings Institute, and Mr. Alex Patanka, Senior Fellow Director of the Iran Program in Middle East Institute. I would like to welcome our two speakers and thank them for accepting our invitation to take part in this panel specifically. I would also like to welcome those whom they are attending the panel on the Center's account on all various social media platform, as well as on its YouTube channel and via Zoom applications. Before I give the floor to the speakers, I would like to draw the attention of our Arab viewers that they can listen to the Arabic interpretation of the discussions by clicking on the French channel down to the screen. Welcome, Dr. Alex, welcome, Dr. Omar, and I would like to start by a question for both of you. I will start with you, Omar. Who are the losers from this treaty? What are their options towards restricting the treaty's interactions?
Thank you for the invitation, Dr. Akdisam. It's a pleasure to be back, although virtually. Hopefully next time it will be in person. So let me summarize how this is perceived, I believe, in Ankara. You asked a direct question about the losers and the winners. I would say in the eyes of Ankara, the Abraham Accords only confirmed what was already happening under the surface. So although it may have come as a surprise, the fact that it came so publicly with this kind of major diplomatic breakthrough, I think there was no illusion in Ankara that the United Arab Emirates already had relations with Israel. And in that sense, I don't think this is perceived in Ankara as a paradigm-changing event. On the other hand, it only confirms the sense of isolation that Turkey is facing in the region, because it's clear that Israel was an ally of Turkey not too long ago. One only has to remember that in the 1990s, Turkey and Israel signed a military partnership agreement. Turkey was the first Muslim country to recognize Israel. To this day, there are more than a dozen flights from Turkey to Israel. And despite all the diplomatic problems between Ankara and Tel Aviv, the trade volume kept increasing between Turkey and Israel. But on the other hand, there is a sense that Turkey is increasingly perceived in the region as an Islamist country, a country that is supporting the Muslim Brotherhood. And this plays a major role in the sense of anger, resentment, and victimhood of Turkey. So there is a level of victimhood in Turkey in the sense that the whole world, starting with the West, the European Union, the United States, Israel, and increasingly now the Gulf countries, with the exception of Qatar, are looking at Turkey as this country that is supporting political Islam. So there's a level of victimhood, but Erdogan is determined to turn this victimhood into his advantage by saying that he's the only supporter, together maybe with a few more countries, of the Palestinian cause. So this creates a sense of for Turkey, a sense of ownership, a more pronounced ownership of the Palestinian issue. And Erdogan, I believe, is determined to use this as a kind of political instrument, as a kind of way to claim that without Turkey, the Palestinian cause would be forgotten, that the Arab world, the Arab League, increasingly Egypt, Jordan, of course, but also now United Arab Emirates, and maybe down the line Saudi Arabia, will no longer be supporting the Palestinians. This is the song he is singing in Turkish politics, and there is a target audience for that. It's not just the followers of Erdogan, but I think this message of the Palestinian cause being forgotten resonates with the wider public opinion. So in a way, you can see Turkey diplomatically losing from that, from an alliance between Israel and United Arab Emirates. But politically, Erdogan is determined to make this as an additional step in his populist messages to the world, to his domestic public opinion, by saying that without Turkey, the Palestinians would be missing a major country's support, and that the Arab world now is joining with Israel, and that they determined to portray Turkey as an Islamist country. The fact that the agreement also targets Iran is not really discussed in Turkey, because Turkey does not see itself fully as an ally of Iran. But overall, this is perceived as the West and the Arab world and Israel joining together against Turkey.
Well, it was funny, Omar, that he was threatening to pull his ambassador in Abu Dhabi. Although, I mean, what did he do for the Palestinian? I mean, he could pull his ambassador in Tel Aviv. It's a good relation, militarily, economically. How can he justify this and convincing his followers in the Muslim world or in Turkey that he is supporting the Palestinian? I didn't see anything in he was supporting in terms only by his words, but nothing done on the ground. Alex, what is your take on this?
First, good morning from Washington. Good evening in Abu Dhabi, Dr. Ebtissam. It's great to see you again and great to be back at this wonderful EPC event. I look forward to the conversation, my good friend Omer. And actually, speaking of Omer, he touched on a lot of points that I wanted to touch on, obviously from the Iranian perspective. Let me sort of put them in three different bags and run them by you. I see Iran as a loser in the sense of losing out geopolitically. I think it loses out ideologically, and I think it's certainly losing out politically at home. And I'll go through some of these points that I've written down. Just bear with me. What do I mean by losing out geopolitically? Like Omar said, the Iranians have known for some time that there is cooperation ties, if not more, between Israel and some of the Gulf Arab states, including the UAE, for some time. They had learned to live with it, but it's kind of entered a new phase. And they now have to, at least in terms of their rhetoric, they now have to express concern. So before this accord was signed, you wouldn't hear Iranian members of the parliament, the Iranian parliament in the Majlis, expressing doubt or concern about what practically this Israeli presence in the Gulf would mean for Iranian security. They might have had those concerns before, but now they have to articulate it. Now they have to say to the Iranian public what it potentially means. So if you had a number of senior Iranian officials come out and say, if Israel is allowed to do A, B, and C against Iranian interest using the Gulf as a platform, we will then be forced to have to retaliate. So the reality was, the Iranians knew Israel was there, has been present in the Gulf for some time, but now they actually have to come up with policy solutions. And more importantly, Dr. Ebtissam, they have to exercise a bit of introspection. They have to look inwards. One of the points you hear again and again, which is interesting, unfortunately not enough of it has been expressed, is the following point. How did we push the Arabs into the arms of the Israelis? What did the Islamic Republic do in the last 42 years that made them decide they're better off with Israel than their own neighbor and historic presence here, Iran? So that to me is definitely a new development. I have to say, the question mark is still out there. How much will Israel and the Gulf states cooperate militarily and in terms of intelligence? That's an open question. I think that will shape a lot of Iran's actions going forward. Look, and final thing about the geopolitics of this, the Islamic Republic has made a giant mistake for the last 42 years, thinking and still believing that you can somehow come to terms with the Gulf states without speaking to them directly, but going over their heads and speaking to the likes of Washington. That's proven to be a false premise. It's not going to work. Very quickly, ideologically, the axis of resistance is on the defensive. This is the new trend. And people are tired of Iran's rhetoric in terms of how you're going to fix the Palestinian issue. It hasn't worked. Axis of resistance is turning out to be a bit of a pipe dream. And I think that, again, puts the pressure on Iran. And that's why I put him down in the loser column. Simple reality is you've tried for 70 some years the armed struggle option against Israel. It hasn't delivered. Perhaps it's about time you tried a different approach. And I think a lot of people in the Middle East, and certainly a lot of people in Iran, although they're not in government, believe that to be the case too. And the Abraham Accords really does put emphasis on common interests, practical solutions to practical problems. This is going to be a big challenge for this accord going forward. People want to see more than just headlines and officials shaking hands. I think in the months and years to come, if these accords actually end up resulting in tangible new ways of cooperation involving Israel and the Gulf states, that would make life even harder for that ideological message that Tehran has been promoting for the last 42 years since the Islamic Republic. And final point, Dr. Ekhtisam, and look, politically in Iran, this is an embarrassment. It's an embarrassment because it's a failure on their part. Their foreign policy has failed. Their success stories in the region are pockets in Lebanon, pockets in Iraq, and pockets in Syria and elsewhere. Now, we have spent the last few years discussing how Iran is on the rise, how Iranian foreign policy now kind of is pushing the United States out of the Middle East and so forth. And to some extent, in parts of the Middle East, that might have been the case. But if you look at what Iranian foreign policy has done to Iranian national interest overall, I think it will be challenged to call it a success. I think what it's done is brought the massive sanctions on the country, hurting Iranian citizens unlike any time before, and frankly, putting the entire regime at risk. I mean, you were talking about a situation now where you might have more people in the streets and the frequency of these protests will increase. That is as a result, the direct result of their foreign policy. So I guess as my concluding words here in this first part of the panel, I would say there is a correlation. There's a direct correlation between what is happening in Iranian foreign policy and how Iranian people live their lives. They're not living a happy life. They're going to come out in the streets. Therefore, everything that the Islamic Republic stands for will be now challenged, unlike any times you've seen it before. And that's a real risk for the regime. I'll stop there.
Yeah, although, Alex, that UAE, Dr. Gargash keep repeating that this agreement is not against anybody, including Iran, but still the reaction from Iran in an aggressive way, as if this is, and this is also UAE repeated that this is its own choice, and whoever want to join, including Iran itself, if it want to be part of the stability in the region, of the access of stability, or I don't know why this reaction also from Turkey and Iran so aggressive toward this agreement, especially between UAE and Israel. Omar, let me ask you, is Turkey considered a loser from this treaty, and why? And what are Ankara's options in making its recalculation to deal with the outcome of this treaty?
Well, I think overall, when Turkey looks at the region, it sees already certain dynamics that were well at play before the agreement. That Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Israel, Egypt, Jordan are basically portraying themselves in the eyes of Turkey as the axis of moderation, the axis of dialogue, is not taken very seriously by Turkey. And Turkey, you have to understand Turkey as a country where Erdogan has a public opinion. The public opinion in Turkey listens to Turkish news, looks at what's going on through the lens of the Turkish media. Turks are not following the international media very often. I think the amount of Turkish people who speak English or Arabic is very low. So the Turks are looking at what's going on in the Middle East through their own televisions, their own media, and what Erdogan is saying. And the way the opposition is talking about what's going on in the Middle East is also not that radically different than what Erdogan is saying. There's a sense that, you know, Turkey is increasingly alone, yes, but there's so much anti-Americanism in Turkey. And I think at the public opinion level, anger against Israel and the perception that Israel, with its settlements policies and its policies in the last few years, has really caused more problems than solutions in the region. So Erdogan, I don't think he's a loser politically at home from this. He's playing this game, as I was trying to explain before, along the lines of, you know, Turkey being one of the few countries that is able to challenge the dynamics in the region, which are going towards the legitimization of the occupation, the legitimization of a situation where all the Arab countries are now signing peace agreements with Israel. There's an irony in all this, and I understand the irony, and there is a lack of reality, because you can rightly ask, what has Turkey done for the Palestinians? But again, in the eyes of the Turkish public opinion, Erdogan represents this symbolic figure against Israel. And when you ask people in the mosques of Turkey, in the conservative circles of Turkey, religious people, they see Erdogan's support for the Palestinian cause as a genuine support. So since the Mavi Marmara incident, where Turkish citizens were killed, since Erdogan's performance at Davos, where he called Shimon Peres a killer, Erdogan, in the eyes of Turkey, has become this symbol figure. And in the eyes, I think, of a lot of people in the region who have sympathies for the Muslim Brotherhood or a more anti-Israeli policy, Erdogan has become a symbol, despite the fact that he's not able to really do much for the Palestinians, of support for both Hamas, but also the Palestinian movement in general. Now, the fact that Mahmoud Abbas himself called what happened a treason gives ammunition to Erdogan, in terms of saying, you know, the Palestinians are not happy. No one remembers the Palestinians. So again, this is more perception than reality. If you're asking the disconnect between reality and what Erdogan is saying, well, Erdogan is in the business of creating perceptions. He's in the business of creating a perception of a country, a Turkey that is strong in the region, that is strong in the eyes of the Muslim Brotherhood, in the eyes of hundreds of millions of Muslims. And he doesn't take United Arab Emirates also, I think, as seriously as many people do in the Middle East. I think that in his eyes, the United Arab Emirates is this country that is basically able to act because it doesn't have a real public opinion. It doesn't have really a real democracy. Whereas in the eyes of Turkey, you know, when you have a public opinion, you have to look at the public opinion, what public opinion is saying. This is why Saudi Arabia is not able to normalize relations with Israel as quickly as United Arab Emirates, because in Saudi Arabia, you have 25 million people, you have a religious establishment, and they have to be careful as they act. If Saudi Arabia normalizes relations, I think Turkey would feel that something more serious is happening in the dynamics of the region. So in that sense, the delusions of grandeur of Turkey also tries to see the United Arab Emirates as this country that is trying to punch above its weight. And this is, I think, something that is well established in Turkey. And Turkey is bothered by the fact that the United Arab Emirates, despite its pronouncements that it doesn't consider Turkey as a threat, when the United Arab Emirates Air Force is doing exercises with the Greek Air Force on the island of Crete, that creates a certain sense that, you know, the United Arab Emirates is up to no good, that they're trying to basically join with enemies of Turkey. There is also one more point about the United Arab Emirates that I think bothers Erdogan, is the belief that the United Arab Emirates played a role in supporting the failed coup in 2016. This kind of conspiracy theory that the United Arab Emirates is supporting Fethullah Gülen, the movement that tried to take Erdogan down in 2016. That is also creating a sense of conspiracy and anger against the United Arab Emirates. But it's a mixed bag, because on the one hand, he doesn't want to take it too seriously. On the other hand, he knows that the United Arab Emirates has a lot of influence in the region and also in Washington. So the perception that Washington is also listening to the United Arab Emirates, the fact that the Trump administration was very much supportive of the UAE is something that also bothers Turkey. So I think overall, to recap, Turkey is definitely not a winner in this thing. There's a threat perception growing, but on the other hand, the real loss, I believe, for Turkey would come when Saudi Arabia also joins the wagon and normalizes relations with Israel.
So you're saying, Omar, it's not, well, I do believe it's not Erdogan himself only. There is also something in the deep state whom they are supporting this. Maybe they are using Erdogan and the slogan of Islamic Turkish, but it's in reality is Ataturk, or Turkey of Ataturk, but it's just wearing or putting the Islamic frame around it. But it's not Islamic. It's more than nationalistic behavior, I believe.
I think what you had in the previous panel with General Amos saying that after Erdogan, we shouldn't expect Ataturk's Turkey to come back, that this country has significantly changed, is something we should take into consideration. Erdogan represents, in my opinion, not just Islam, but a sense of anti-Western Turkish nationalism. Anti-Western Turkish nationalism because of the Kurdish problem, because of the perception that the United States and the European Union do not respect Turkey. So there is this sense of, need to play a bigger role and not to be subservient to NATO, to be more independent, to be more sovereign, to play a more geostrategic game, a more 360-degree geostrategic game with China, with Russia, with India down the line, maybe figure out alliances that are not totally beholden to NATO, to put Turkish eggs into different baskets. This is the opposition's view also. The opposition also talks about the need for Turkey to be more independent from the West. So when Erdogan is out, we will have a coalition government in Turkey with some elements of the Kemalist party, with some elements of the Nationalist party. But what will be for sure is that the Turkish military will no longer be very powerful. And the sad reality of Turkish politics is that without the Turkish military playing a hegemonic role, Turkey could not have signed a military partnership treaty with Israel. Not too long ago, in the 1990s, late 1990s, Israeli Air Force was training in Anatolia. Why? How come? Two reasons. Because the military was running Turkey. Second, there was a peace process. The Oslo peace process was there. It legitimized Turkey's relations with Israel. Today, these two elements are absent. The Turkish military is no longer there. It cannot call the shots. And second, there is no real peace process between Palestinians and Israelis. So therefore, the Turkish public opinion has turned really angry with Israel because Israel is perceived as the responsible country for the occupation, for the settlements. And Shimon Peres, etc., these guys were moderates. Netanyahu is not a moderate. Israeli politics has moved to the right. There's a perception that Israel now is more aggressive. They no longer want a two-state solution. It has become a more hawkish, more aggressive country. And therefore, the public opinion is still very supportive of the Palestinians, and there is no peace process. So in the absence of the military and a peace process, I don't think there's a return to a Turkey which can have strong military partnership or strategic relations with Israel.
Right. Alex, what are Iran's options in dealing with the outcome of this treaty, and in which issues Iran will respond, in your view?
It's got a number of options, Dr. Ibtisam, but there aren't really good ones depending on perspective. I mean, you could argue that Iran could just learn to live with Israel being on the ground as part of the new diplomatic presence in the Gulf. Iran, after all, learned for a long time to live with Israel in Turkey, Israel in Azerbaijan, Israel in Georgia, Israel in Turkmenistan, so, you know, having Israel on its border is not a new phenomenon. The Iranians have dealt with it before. If they choose to deal with it, they can do so. And I think in the case of the UAE, certainly, their options are limited. UAE is a significant trading partner. The Iranians hate to see themselves cut diplomatic relations with UAE and leave the country. They rely on the UAE for various reasons, and it would isolate them in ways they don't want to see. And to your point about what Dr. Gargash had said, yeah, I think the UAE's position has always been, look, we're an independent state, and we have the right to choose what sort of foreign policy we want to have. The Islamic Republic has chosen its path. We're choosing our path. And I think, you know, I heard Dr. Javad Zarif this week describe, you know, the situation along these lines, that President Trump is gone, Iran stays, and our neighbors will stay. That's very true. But the fact is that in the case of UAE, and you could add more countries to it, Bahrain, they also want to have their own foreign policy. And calling them names, calling them all sorts of names that we all know from the Iranian state media is not going to help. So, you know, the optimist in me hopes that the Iranians will learn to live with this as it is. And I think, you know, much of this will depend on the nature of Israeli Gulf relations going forward. If you end up with Israeli intelligence operatives using UAE to, I don't know, carry out operations inside of Iran, which the Iranians believe is aimed at regime change, then the Iranians will react. They will. I mean, I can only imagine the likes in the Revolutionary Guards will react. They probably won't be able to reach the Israeli homeland, but they can hit Israel or UAE interest in UAE, where they probably feel more confident. But that's a nightmare scenario. That's not going to happen. I'm sure both the UAE and Israel are going to be very cautious in terms of not giving the Iranians a pretext to turn UAE or the Gulf in the general sense into a battleground for the geopolitical supremacy that's been going on. I mean, that, as I said, that would be a nightmare scenario. I mean, and another way of looking at it, Dr. Ebtisam, is I'm certainly a critic of the Islamic Republic, so it depends who you ask. But if you ask someone like me, and I believe I probably represent the majority silent view of the Iranian population, the Islamic Republic, unlike what you heard Omar just say, is totally missing legitimacy on the issue of Israel and Iran. The Iranian people probably are some of the biggest supporters of Israel. Now, that doesn't mean you support settlements or you support Prime Minister Netanyahu, but they support the idea that the Islamic Republic gets on the business of acting like a normal state. And if you're a normal state, you recognize Israel as a fellow UN member state. That doesn't mean you stop questioning how they treat the Palestinians, but you start up by saying you are a fellow UN member state. You've been part of life here in the Middle East for the last 7 decades. We have issues with you, but we can get on, try and solve it. I mean, that is the best case scenario. Obviously, someone like Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is not going to go there, but he is 81 years old. The country's on the brink, and there are probably people in Tehran, I'm sure, including in the Revolutionary Guards, who are thinking, how do we get ourselves out of this hole that we're in? And it's a hole. It's an ideological hole. There is nothing really for Iranian national interest to be gained by Iran being in places like Iraq and Lebanon and Syria. I mean, what Iran needs to do, optimistically, I should say, there are people who in Iran, inside the government, who are now articulating this, saying we need to look at nation building, look at economic development. We have unemployment rates that are unsustainable. We have migration from the rural areas to cities that if these continue, it's exactly what happened in 1978, 79, when the poor working class rose up, joined forces with the middle class, and you had the fall of the Shah in 79. Now, the Iranian middle class for a long time has been anti-Islamic Republic, but the equation could change with more working class deprived individuals join this movement. And as I said before, the only solution to this is to change your foreign policy, to invest less, and do things differently going forward. And final point, Dr. Ibtisam, look, the reality and the elephant in the room is much will depend also on what happens between the Israelis and the Palestinians. If you have another intifada that's bloody, that we will watch on our TV screens, that a lot of Palestinians are getting killed and Israelis getting killed, that kind of scenario will just basically shape the trend going forward. Politicians can sit there and agree on things on paper and it all makes sense and logical, but then some events overtake the decision makings that are being done in offices, and you have emotions being in the driver's seat as opposed to logic. We've seen it happen before. We could see it again. So that is not something Iran controls. I don't think the Iranians will be sending off their latest missiles to Hamas or the Islamic Jihad to start a new war in Israel. I don't see the Iranians are that confident. So overall, my conclusion is the Iranians will shout a lot, be angry, call countries that sign up new deals with Israel, like Sudan and UAE and Bahrain and others in the pipeline. They will call them names, but probably going to try and let it just go away and get on with life. That's my suspicion. I don't see him wanting a war. And the other thing I should say, just to a point Omar made, yes, there'll be competition for the ummah. The Iranians are doing very similar things as the Turks are doing. That the Arabs have given up on their own fellow Arabs, and we as Muslims, we're not Arabs, the Iranians, but we're Muslims. We should. I mean, that's the rhetoric that's coming from Tehran. Interestingly enough, they will compete with the Turks for this. And the Iranians aren't always happy to see the Turks take the lead. So, different aspects to this conflict going forward. But I don't expect fireworks. I do not see the Iranian state having the capacity to do anything major as an option, because they don't have much fuel in the tank. They need to worry about staying in power.
Is it they are becoming more bold because of the new administration in United States? I will come to you about the same question, Omar. So, I mean, how this reflects on the Iranian? You mentioned Zarif announcement. Not only this, in Latin America, I mentioned yesterday also what he said, that they didn't get the revenge of Qasem Soleimani's killing. So how this will be reflect on their also position towards these changes in the region with these treaties?
So Dr. Ibtisam, the part in me that makes me feel less optimistic about the next few weeks and months ahead is the initial reaction from the office of the Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and the Revolutionary Guards. To a logical person, to somebody who is dispassionate about this and puts his or her country first as opposed to the regime interest and ideology, and I know it's a big ask, but let's just say you put your national interest first. Then the Biden win, the election of Joe Biden here in the United States could have been the perfect opportunity for Khamenei to shift in a new direction, to sort of say, it was all Trump, and now he's gone, let's move on with it. And it has to be remembered, he has always said he'll be the first one to raise his hand if relations could be reestablished with Washington. So what has he done instead the last week? You just need to go to his Twitter account, calling the entire US government corrupt, moral decline, and all the name calling that we have gotten used to from the Islamic Republic. I don't know who is trying to convince by questioning the health of American elections. I can tell you, we don't have a guardian council here in the United States that decides who can run for office and who cannot. There are other limitations, no doubt about it. But my point is, Khamenei and the Revolutionary Guards, and I wrote a piece about this just yesterday, a short piece. My point is, the initial first few days following the US elections, to me, suggest that the Iranian regime is still thinking small. Opposite what the Abraham Accords is about, which is to think big and to think ahead. They're thinking small. They're thinking, all right, Biden comes in, we might have a new nuclear deal, but we're not going to give up anything else. we're not going to change our overall position in terms of being a revolutionary, militant Islamist state. And the part about militant Islamists is the part that really doesn't have much of a support base. Maybe 15, 20% of the Iranian population still believes in the ideas of spreading their revolution to places like Palestine. And I just don't see how this can be sustained going forward, and certainly don't see how it can be sustained once Ayatollah Khamenei departs this world. I can't see a successor who wants to continue on this path.
Anwar, how do you Turkey calculate this new administration, Biden, coming to the White House in terms of its position in the region?
So, Dr. Abdesam, you asked earlier, is Turkey a loser of the deal between Israel and United Arab Emirates? And I tried to give a gray answer, not really, to a certain degree, yes. Here, I can really say Turkey is the big loser of Trump's defeat.
How?
Erdogan wanted Trump to win, because the only way Turkey can avoid, in my opinion, major sanctions coming from the American Congress, both House of Representatives and Senate, for Turkey activating, deploying, using the S-400 missile defense system that it has purchased from Russia, was through the White House. President Trump was the reason why Turkey managed to avoid major military and economic sanctions. So Erdogan knew that without President Trump at the White House, he would have a much more difficult time containing these economic sanctions coming to Turkey, military sanctions. On top of that, Vice President and Biden, President-elect Biden, gave an interview to the New York Times months ago in December 2019, where he called Erdogan an autocrat, close to a dictator, and he said he would work with that the United States should work with the opposition in Turkey, and they should try to bring the opposition to power, and that the United States should support the Kurds, both in Syria, but also in Turkey, for a peaceful solution, a political solution. So the messages, the signals coming from the Biden camp were not positive at all towards Erdogan. And there is a sense of panic, I believe, today in Ankara about what to do with the Biden administration, because the Biden administration is not interested in a reset with Turkey without Turkey abiding by certain norms. And these norms will have to include becoming a loyal NATO ally, denouncing the S-400s, deciding not to operate them, not to activate them, and also figuring out a new path for relations in Syria. I don't think President-elect Biden is willing to give up the Kurds in Syria the way the Trump administration did. And on top of that, there are also a number of additional issues, such as the ones my friend, colleague Stephen Cook mentioned yesterday, the Halkbank case, which is a Turkish public bank which was involved in violating sanctions against Iran. That case is in the Justice Department. And President Trump was putting a lot of pressure on the US judiciary not to go forward with sanctions, and on the Department of Justice not to announce major penalties for Halkbank. So I think the United States has now, under Biden, and under a new Biden administration, will have a lot of leverage, economic leverage against Erdogan. And the economy is where Erdogan is the most vulnerable. Because as you know, Turkey doesn't have oil, doesn't have natural gas. It is totally dependent on a level of economic development that depends on productivity, some level of foreign investment, some foreign direct investment. And because of COVID-19, because of the mismanagement of the Turkish economy, which culminated just a couple of days ago with the resignation of Erdogan's son-in-law, Berat Albayrak, from the Ministry of Finance, the Turkish economy and the Turkish lira is in a free fall. So Erdogan is vulnerable, and that makes him.
How do you read this resignation, Amr?
I see it as a major dispute about the management of the economy. the son-in-law of Erdogan wanted to control the central bank, wanted to control all the decisions. But Erdogan saw that his son-in-law was not very good at managing the economy. And he wanted to bring additional people and to have more experts in the room. And his son-in-law felt betrayed. He thought his family connection with his father-in-law would protect him from such mismanagement. But Erdogan realized that the current momentum in Turkish economy is so bad that he needed to make changes. So he replaced the central bank governor, and his son-in-law reacted to that. And then they had a big family argument. And I think at the end of the day, this whole operation collapsed. So now Erdogan is taking full control of the economy. He's letting his son-in-law go. I think Erdogan behind the scenes was already controlling the economy. Let's not make an illusion. It was not the son-in-law that really controlled the economy. But nevertheless, I think Erdogan now realized that his son-in-law was becoming a public relations problem, because he was very good. He was sending the wrong messages to the Turkish public opinion, to the Turkish TVs, about not caring about the value of the dollar, not caring about foreign direct investment. Whereas Erdogan needs to, I think, emphasize the importance of economic management. Without the economy doing well, Erdogan may lose an election. That's the big issue here that differs Turkey from the rest of the Middle East. Turkey is still an autocratic country, but elections happen in Turkey. And unlike in Egypt, where 85% of the people do not participate in elections, in Turkey, 85% of the people, 90% of the people vote. There is tremendous turnout. People are hopeful that despite the fact that elections may not be fully fair, may not be fully free, people are hopeful that they can vote out Erdogan. So Erdogan knows that the economy really matters. And to bring it to the real issue that we were talking, the Abraham Accords, such issues like Israel, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, foreign policy issues are enabling Erdogan to distract attention from home, from the economic problems. So I don't think Erdogan will really change his foreign policy, which is a pro-Islamist, populist foreign policy, because the economic situation is getting worse in Turkey. I think it's the opposite. As the economy worsens in Turkey, Erdogan will be looking at opportunities in the Middle East to wave the flag of political Islam, to wave the flag of Turkish victimhood, Turkish necessity, the righteous indignation of Turkey that we are the only country in this world where Israel, United Arab Emirates, United States are crushing Palestinians. We are the only country, Turkey, supporting our Palestinian brothers. That's the populist game he will play in order to distract attention from the mismanagement of the economy at home. So in a way, that's why he's not really a loser of the Abraham Accord. He's able to use the Abraham Accord to his own benefit in order to distract people from domestic problems at home.
Okay, interesting. And this question for both of you. Alex, what are the options of the tri-parties, US, Israel, and UAE, in adjusting the rules of the regional game?
So, Dr. Ebtissam, I really think the fact that UAE, Bahrain, and others have now joined, taking this initiative. First, I hope it's going to be sustained. I hope this is not just going to be something that will collapse anytime soon. I hope this will be an initiative that will be built on. You need, going down the road, you really do need success stories to be able to attach to this accord. And I'm hopeful that will come. And one of the success stories really is to bring the Palestinians into the conversation as soon as possible. They just cannot be left out of in the cold. And that's the tough part. How does UAE, how does US, Israel bring the Palestinians into the conversation? Because nobody can.
Well, Alex, nobody exclude them from negotiation. That was, they were offensive and the reaction towards that agreement. They didn't pull. I mean, this is a strategic step. They could build on it and they come to negotiation and look to UAE and as a helper in that. They took another, they as Amos said, they choose to be a loser, not a winner.
Right. No, I agree with that. And that's,
I'm talking about the leadership, not.
right, sure. But look, end of the day, if the Palestinians, they hopefully get to the point where they accept the new realities on the ground, it will just make life that much more difficult for the likes of Erdogan or Khamenei in Tehran to use this Palestinian issue for their own political purposes, or in terms of expanding the geopolitical sphere of influence. So I think, that said, I think so much of this, two things I say. One is, I think it is important for the sake of UAE stability, Gulf stability in general, but also for the sake of Israel, not to undo this accord anytime soon. It's important that and I know this is not on the cards, but it deserves to be said, that UAE or the Gulf in general does not become a staging ground for operations against the Islamic Republic. So I think that is the one thing that would force the Iranians to want to retaliate. And that might in turn create a chain of reaction that will just put the whole accord under so much weight that people will question whether it's viable to keep it alive. So I think it's so much nicer to focus on the commercial ties, transfer of technology, investment, the type of things we've seen in recent weeks being discussed between UAE and Israel. Those are the types of things that Iranians will have a very tough time arguing against.
Which is this is the real now. It's
right, exactly.
Now the perception of the Iranian, I don't know how they perceive it. I mean, still,
exactly.
This is what they announced, that they are going to cooperate in economy and health, different. I mean, peaceful relation. Right. Okay, that's what has been called peace treaty.
No, I hear you, and I hope what you just said is also heard in Tehran. Again, it's not a new message from UAE. It's a message that's repeatedly being expressed, but they need to hear it and take it seriously. This is not against them, even though obviously, as we all know, UAE and Israel do share serious concerns about what Iran is doing in the region. No trying to hide that. Final point, Dr. Ebtissam. Look, so much of this goes back to what I said earlier about where Khamenei and the Islamic Republic choose to go in terms of their foreign policy. If they choose to go in the direction of really trying to broaden the conversation, you can start by having a small agreement where you revive the 2015 nuclear deal. You revive it, you go back, some of these sanctions are lifted, Iran can sell its oil again, it feels like, okay, the pressure is a bit off. And in return, they put a cap on their nuclear activities. So the nuclear clock that's been ticking away the last 2 years or so, that will go slowly forward as opposed to the speed it's been on so far. That could be the beginning, but with the caveat that we're not just going to, this time around, the JCPOA 2.0 needs to very quickly broaden the mandate. It needs to talk about the region. It needs to talk about confidence building across the board. It needs to talk about some of the things that Iran doesn't want to talk about. And I know it's a two-way street. I'm not saying the Iranians don't have issues that they want to raise with the neighboring states, but the fact is that they are in a minority as far as the U.S., Israel, UAE group is concerned. So if Iran decides that yes, we will take a option of just saving the nuclear deal, but we also agreed to quickly broaden the conversation. And it could happen in 6 months. I mean, by the time Rouhani is gone next summer, you could potentially have had 6 months of negotiations between the Biden administration and the sitting Iranian Hassan Rouhani. So my point is this: the mistake the Obama administration made was that they thought a nuclear deal alone will solve everything. The Iranians will quickly come to their senses and make changes and reform elsewhere in their policies. That didn't happen. That's why Trump administration put the maximum pressure campaign on. And now this Biden administration will have leverage. They will have leverage because the Iranians are really shell-shocked because of the economic pains they've been under. So don't squander a leverage. Talk to the Iranians, say, all right, we understand that you weren't willing to talk to Trump, but this is our proposal. Come back to the deal, but very quickly we have to broaden the conversation. And if they broaden the conversation, and this is my final point, that would, number one, the US will then be accepted by Iran as a player in the region. Because remember, throughout these years, Islamic Republic's position has been, we talk to the Gulf states but on a bilateral basis, on a one-to-one. We don't want the United States involved. That is not realistic. There is a role for the United States. It's not that Iran doesn't like it, it's that the Gulf states want the United States involved for whatever
But
reason.
the JCPOA, it was between Iran and United States. I mean,
Right, so what I'm saying,
don't go to the Gulf is, I mean, always looking to United States. And this is contradictory between the discourse and the reality.
so my point after that is you have to have the Gulf states at the table. Yeah, and that's something Washington has to accept, and for Tehran to accept if you want real, sustainable de-escalation across the Gulf region.
That's right. That's right. Omar, what are the regional issues susceptible for escalation and other issues apt for deterrent in light of this treaty?
So the potential for escalation is something that Alex mentioned. If there is a new intifada, if there is a sense of Palestinian anger and despair, both in Gaza or in the West Bank, if the Netanyahu government or a future Israeli government does not really show anything that would be in favor of a two-state solution, the image of a Palestinian uprising could play to the hands of Erdogan, saying, I told you so. I told you no one listens to the Palestinians. This accord is behind their back. So that would basically strengthen Erdogan's hand in terms of saying, these countries that are signing a peace treaty with this Israel that is an aggressive country, are making a big mistake. So on the other hand, I think the real problem for Turkey in terms of escalation remains the problems related to its neighborhood. Turkey is so heavily engaged in Libya, in Azerbaijan, in Syria, in Iraq, on the Kurdish front, in the Eastern Mediterranean, with Greece, with the European Union now, a big clash with France, where Turkey is playing the role of the leader of the Muslim world, the leader of the Ummah. All these things are fueling a sense of confrontation between Turkey and almost the rest of the world. An advisor to Erdogan called Turkey's position once the precious loneliness. He said, we know we are lonely. We know no one likes us, but this is a precious loneliness. There is a kind of righteous indignation about how the rest of the world does not understand Turkey's position, that we are there representing the voiceless, the people who are oppressed. So that's the kind of mental mindset of Erdogan that I think could lead to major problems, not just with neighbors, but also the European Union, with the United States. I expect things to get really worse in terms of Turkish-American relations. A Biden administration, as I said, is not interested in a reset with Turkey unless Turkey makes it clear that it will change its position. And for that reason, I see a number of issues where we can see escalation of problems, both in the region, at the regional level in the Middle East, but also on the Kurdish front with Turkey, on Turkey's relations with the West, United States and Europe. Let me say one more thing about Turkey-Russia relations. Turkey-Russia relations are also far from perfect. There are problems in Turkish-Russian relations almost on every issue, on all areas. In Syria, there are disagreements. In Libya, there are disagreements. In the Eastern Mediterranean, there are disagreements. In Ukraine, Crimea, there are disagreements. In Nagorno-Karabakh, Armenia, Azerbaijan, there are certain disagreements. So this relationship is also not very stable with Putin. It looks like Turkey's playing a kind of double game, good relations with Russia, but in fact, on the Russian front too, Turkey feels that it doesn't have a very, very strong position. Putin is in a much more advantageous position when it comes to different cards that he's holding. So overall, I see Turkey vulnerable to escalation of crisis, both in the region, but also in relations with the West and in relations with Russia.
Well, I'll move to the Q&A from our viewers, and I will apologize also that we have only 3 minutes, and this from Sterling Jensen, it goes for both of you. Try to be brief, please, Alex. So, to what extent will Turkey and Iran compete or cooperate regarding the Abraham Accord? Alex?
I don't think that's going to be the first issue to worry about. The Iranians worry about trade with Turkey more than anything else. You have to remember Iranian trade has shifted massively in favor of the neighboring states. It used to be that Iran needed its exports to go to places in the Far East. A lot of that is gone. So the neighboring states are now becoming so critical for Iranian economic well-being for various reasons we don't have time to get into. So I don't think it's going to be the headline in terms of Iranian-Turkish relations going forward.
Mark?
I think it creates a increased sense of solidarity in terms of representing the Palestinian issue, at least symbolically, between Ankara, Tehran, but also potentially Qatar. So there is a sense that this is pushing the axis of resistance to so-called axis of resistance together. It kind of consolidates, in my opinion, the mindset, the way they look at the world in terms of an Arab, Israeli, American bloc against the Palestinians. And Turkey, Erdogan, I think, is not really interested in using this in terms of improving relations with Iran. He already has a balanced relationship with Iran, but symbolically, it is pushing Turkey and Iran to the same corner.
Thank you, Omar, and thank you, Alex. It's a wonderful discussion. I'm sorry to end this for 1 hour, but because we have our third panel today, and it will, here I will remind our viewers that we have 9:30 Abu Dhabi time. We have the third session today. It's about Abraham Accord, Middle East between political rationality and delusions. We have Ambassador Brian Hawke, and we have he's the director of advisor for President of the United States for the Abraham Accords, and we have Ambassador Alan Spuz, Director General, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Israel, and we have also Ambassador Khalifa Shaheen Al-Marar, Assistant Minister for Political Affairs, Ministry of Foreign Affairs in UAE. And thank you, my dearest friend and our speakers. It was an honor having you with us, and looking forward to having you next year, and not virtual, factual. ADSD.
Good job.
Thank you, Dr. Ebtesam. Congratulations on the hard work, since you are moderating all the panels.
You see?
I admire your stamina and hard work.
I am an ironic woman, you know. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Wassalam. Thank you.